And so I think taking away kids' agency and the right to their own body is, it's anti-human.
I have a question.
That is a psychotic way to look at things. Okay, everyone, I think the detransition issue is the most important cultural issue of our time because it is the front line of what you would just broadly call the culture war, the fundamental disagreements between conservatives and liberals, religious people, atheists. There's an underlying culture war that is actually going to tear this country apart from a polarization perspective, and this issue is on the front line. And Jubilee is a large mainstream outlet, so depending on how this conversation goes, it could very much affect the entire cultural conversation. So there's a lot of stakes running on this, and I'm curious to see how it goes.
Gender-related treatment should be banned for minors.
Do I agree or disagree? My gut instinct is to agree, given all the crazy stuff going on. But people like Abigail Schreier and Ken Zucker are credible, in my opinion. Certainly transphobes like Jordan Peterson would regard them as credible. And they recognize that there are some very extreme minority of children who actually do benefit from medical intervention regarding gender issues. I don't think medical intervention in children should be banned, but it should be made far easier to sue any doctor or any hospital that performs a gender transition on a child, and that child regrets it. That would put the burden on the doctors to make sure that they are 100% certain, or as certain as you possibly can be, that the child is ready to transition, rather than just, oh, here's an opportunity to make some money by creating a permanent medical patient who we can then put on hormones for the rest of their life. So I would not agree, as much as I understand why people would agree.
Medical transition is no place for a child. I transition as an adult, and I have medical complications. I have mental health issues. Child cannot consent to a medical transition because kids want to eat ice cream every day. It doesn't mean that they should.
I kind of agree with you on that as well because we have so many rules and regulations when it comes to tobacco or alcohol or any type of drugs. Driving a car, you can't even rent a motel until you're like 25. There's some specific things that we need to put into place that I think would help protect our children because the minors themselves really don't know who they are until they become 25, 26 years old. Their minds aren't fully developed, and it kind of breaks my heart a little bit.
So I did transition as a minor. I was a teenager who had a lot of mental health issues and had been sexually exploited and hated my body. And it ended with me kind of finding spaces where that was twisted into, no, you're just a boy in the wrong body. And it ended with me having my first ever medical intervention being a double mastectomy at 16 before any hormones, before anything else. And because of transitioning at such a young age, in the past 6 months, I have watched my body fall apart and waste away in front of me.
That's what people refer to when they talk about social contagion. It's a technical term. It refers to people who buy into a certain perspective on identity or a certain psychological phenomenon, and they are convinced to go through with something even though it's not intrinsic to them, right? The idea that, for example, while men and women are social categories that are reinforced through media, and so what we think is a man and a woman is a result of social conditioning. It's like, okay, then you clearly recognize that someone who is fed constantly images and videos of talking about whether or not you think, you may be transgender or not, is of course going to have an effect on whether or not that person identifies as transgender. And this is the price that we pay for not recognizing that.
I have constant joint pain. I've watched my muscle mass waste away. I've watched my vocal cords hurt. I don't know if I'll ever be able to carry a child. The evidence we have suggests that the best way to figure out if gender dysphoria persists into adulthood is to let them grow up. Because a lot of these kids will grow out of it, and many of them will just grow up and end up being gay or gender nonconforming.
Yep.
Can the disagreeers step forward?
I think it's 80% of kids who have gender dysphoria grow out of it and become gay.
I mean, if we're going to be honest, every major medical organization supports gender-affirming care for trans youth. They say it's safe and it's life-saving. And there are numerous studies that back that up.
The study that backs it up for puberty blockers is the Dutch protocol, and the same scientists—
I have 10 studies that I can bring to you right now.
The same scientists that brought that up have since rolled it back and said it was never supposed to be applied the way it has. The American medical industry, we all know, is money hungry and has gone off the rails.
I do agree that there are definitely some doctors out there that may be taking advantage of trans people, and I'm sorry that you went through this. Truly, I really am sorry.
Doesn't
But
sound
trans
like it.
kids are valid, and it's not a decision that they're making.
Right.
It's healthcare.
I want to speak to that real quick. Like, I came out 13 years ago when I was 14, and I knew, not that I was trans, but that I was a boy. I had to go through a lengthy process of therapy and seeing an endocrinologist and like go through different tests and exams to make sure that this was real to everyone else involved. Transitioning and being trans was just a process I went through to become who I always knew I was. It wasn't a like decision that I made. It was a life or death thing for me. And
Like I said, there are people like Ken Zucker and Abigail Schreier who point out that there are people who could benefit from medical intervention when they're children, and perhaps this guy is. But the problem that I have with this is him saying, I always knew I was a boy. I'm not trans, I'm really a boy. That right there, regardless of whether or not you have a valid experience of gender dysphoria, that is a false claim. It is a objectively, verifiably false claim to say that I am really a male or female when I'm not, when I'm the opposite sex. And part of the problem with this whole issue is that there is all of this underlying attachments to the whole issue of, well, it's not just allowing males and females to pursue medical transition, it's recognizing that a male really is a female or really should be a female. That's a religious claim to say that I was born in the wrong body. Wrong by what standard? Who put you in that body? So I don't know anything about this person individually, but that statement highlights so much of the problem here.
And if I hadn't gotten on hormones and gotten surgery at 16, I don't know if I would be here.
As a father, I have 4 kids, and also as a trans person, I think that knowing what it looked like for me as a child and that experience of going through all of the turmoil and all of the trepidation around my gender identity, I would not put my children in that situation. And also, I don't think that surgeries should be allowed for minors. Like when we look at the data and we look at the statistics and we look at the research, the vast majority of these surgeries are happening to adults. They're not minors. Yeah. So let's start there, right? And then further than that, if we look at puberty blockers are reversible. So when it comes to children, when we talk about puberty blockers, that gives them a shot. Yeah. And it gives them autonomy over their bodies. It gives them a space that they can explore their expression. They can explore who they are without surgeries, without all of these other things that could have permanent effects. My kids were maybe 8 and 10 when I started my transition. And so I talked to them in kid terms. I told my son, I said, look, your mom, dad wants to be a dad because that's how I feel. And my kids being so young, they understood it. They were like, okay, we're with it, And so as they got older, I would bring them into my world and get them to understand the things that maybe I was going through. But now that they're adults, they understand differences in people, not just trans people, but people in general.
So there is such thing as gender fluid. How
Yes.
do you know that this kid is not going to change their gender expression later on? We really actually don't have studies on children that are taken over long term, like over 10 years, 20 years. You've only been on testosterone 14 years. One of the oldest trans men, Buck Angel, he almost died from testosterone. You're saying right now it saved your life, you may still die from it, you don't know. You're still
happy.
Exactly.
You'll die for ideology, and a lot of people have died for an ideology.
It's not an ideology.
But we have
It
more
is.
people that are dying
It's
because
an
they're not
idea that you were
allowed
born
to
in the wrong
express
body.
themselves. Look at the suicide rate of trans masculine folks. It is at 55%. And one of the factors that could save their lives is support, right? And so if we have folks that are committing suicide because they're not allowed to transition, how do we fix that? If you're telling me the transition for children or minors is something that shouldn't be done.
First, you have to prove that the reason they're deleting themselves is because they genuinely have gender dysphoria and can't access it, which there's no evidence of that because so many of the kids that have gender dysphoria are also autistic. They have other mental health issues that could be contributing to their risk of self-harm.
Here, I am very sensitive to this subject, as I've been the person who has had to talk people off the ledge when it comes to suicidality. The discussion around how we talk about suicide is a very dangerous one in this community. My parents were told, do you want a dead daughter or a living son? that's not an appropriate way to talk about that.
And I understand that, but
And
it is our transmasculine youth
I understand
that
that.
are at the highest risk
I
of
understand that,
suicide.
and they deserve help. But we also need to have a responsible conversation that is not using suicide as a means to push them down a pipeline before they have that comprehensive care.
So I have a question.
Sorry, Aris, I know you've been wanting to say
Yeah,
something.
no, because I have a big problem. Oh, yeah, no, so I'm not an interrupter. What I'm going to say is we insult children, our youth, so much by taking away their autonomy and their own agency over their own decisions and insulting that they know who they are. Like an adult knows who they are more than they do. No one knows who I am more than I do.
Right.
And it's always
Let's let her finish.
been that way. I've always known who I was. I've never felt like I was in the wrong body. I just had to adjust my body. And so I think taking away kids' agency and the right to their own body is, it's anti-human.
I have a question.
That is a psychotic way to look at things. Take away the autonomy of children. That's why they don't have rights. That's why they can't sign contracts. That's why they can't consent to all manner of things that a small number of ideologues would like them to be able to, and historically have. This really, I feel myself getting upset. Like I said, this issue is much deeper than just a gender issue. It's an entire philosophy issue about what that person just said about, well, we shouldn't take away the autonomy of children. Yes, we should. That's why they're children.
Question, do you believe minors should be able to get tattoos or plastic surgery or consent to the list of other...
That's so different.
No, wait, no,
understand,
hold on,
I
let me
understand they
answer
are
this
different
question for
things,
you.
but to what
No, you
level
can't
do
even
we...
make that
to what level do we give children bodily autonomy over everything they do? Because here's the thing, children need barriers in childhood development. You need barriers, and they need a safe way to push against those barriers. And I worry with the current medical system that instead of giving them a safe way to express themselves and push against barriers, we have taken some of those barriers away. And that is why you see more detransitioners, because those barriers have been lifted.
Yeah, they're not just doling out surgeries for children. That's not happening
I had a
anywhere.
letter from a therapist in a single visit at the gender clinic office
And
before
that
I
was
had
abuse
the first...
from that therapist who did
Yeah,
not
that-
Yeah, that's
psychoanalyze
awful.
the rest
That
of
should
your
not
issues.
happen.
Right, and that shouldn't
because
have
happened.
your
Should not
issues
happen
weren't
to you.
being trans. There were a lot of other issues that you're
I have a
addressing right
diagnosis
now.
of gender dysphoria as
And
well.
you shouldn't, you were misdiagnosed.
No, I have one.
Right.
Yeah, you had to get a second opinion, honey.
Right.
And how was
Can
how was I supposed to do that when my parents were told
That's
that I
not
would
your
kill
fault.
myself?
But your
Yeah, that's not your
parents,
fault.
your parents,
Their biggest crime in all this was trusting in a medical system that they thought would help me, and the professionals apparently not doing the right thing
I
here.
understand, but your
Yeah,
parents were
absolutely
responsible for the decisions that were made on your behalf.
I think that what this really highlights is the
I don't know what that was, but everyone just seemed like they were being an asshole in that exchange.
importance of you sharing your story, because what it shows is that you can't jump into these transitions, and you
Yeah.
shouldn't listen to these doctors that push you to transition
Right.
just
Nobody
because you're
should.
feeling a certain way.
Social media brainwashes teens to believe that they're trans.
If you believe that gender roles like man and woman are the result of social conditioning reinforced through media and all that, which is the claim that every trans activist and gender ideologue will put forward, then obviously you can be socially conditioned into a trans identity. Duh. The idea that this is not, that people dispute this is beyond laughable.
I have to agree on that one. Like, there's this thing about it.
Right.
Like, yeah, there's this play that they have.
I don't think that it necessarily brainwashes children, but I think there are a lot of people who get into being queer or trans because it's trendy. And I know that's a really controversial statement to make as a trans person.
No, it's not.
But I have seen it, I've experienced it, and I also find that social media, especially apps like TikTok, give a lot of these kids so much misinformation
Yes.
and lead to people thinking they're trans when there are much deeper issues, and everyone just wants to belong and find an identity, especially when they're young. You know?
I think brainwash is such a strong
Yeah, that's a
word
very
to use
aggressive
there
word. I
when
would
it's
not. That's why I hesitated to step forward.
And that's why I
yeah.
would step in and actually say it's more so of like a social contagion.
Just yeah.
What got me to transition in the first
Read
place.
that again. Social contagion is a spread of emotions or behaviors from one individual or another to another, sometimes without awareness. The most common examples of social contagion are things like anorexia or bulimia, which tends to be localized in friend groups and spreads via social media, like other forms of body dysmorphia.
Social contagion.
Just, yeah.
What got me to transition in the first place was social media. It had a grasp on me that there could be something else out in the world for me during that discovery, and I played it to the fullest 100%. I even passed as a female for a good, what was it, 6 years out of the 7 that I was transitioned. And later down the road, I went and paid out of pocket and talked to just a regular therapist, and she made me start questioning my own existence in a way, what I can do as a human being, not just as a male or a female, but what can I contribute to the society. And it made me open up to maybe I was born as a male, and it feels empowering to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was heavy on social media. Like in my transition, Tumblr, that was the place to be for sure. And everyone was talking about their transition from my experience, and everyone was talking about a lot of mental health issues, depression, and all of that. And it was kind of being trendy in that sense. Like when TikTok came out, like that was like a whole nother world. And the biggest thing that I found with that is like they weren't saying a lot of the negative things that were happening in their transition. There was always like a positive outlook on it, like I'm being who I need to be, like this is great.
This is the ticket to your happiness.
Yeah, and I
sold.
like so much on social media. Like I made a documentary on my transition, and I really went into depth of like a lot of my depression that I dealt with on that, and I didn't find anyone talking about that.
I personally didn't think I was trans till I saw earlier trans YouTubers. Before I was just gender bending man. And for sure, I also feel like comparing yourself on social media to other people that are more beautiful and successful will create dysphoria of some kind. And some people
It will affect your self-image for sure.
Because we see all those beautiful trans women that are all dolled up or had every possible plastic surgery they could ever get. You're gonna feel dysphoria. You're gonna be like, I don't look like that.
And that's
so I
in
have to go
general,
through
though.
steps.
You know what I mean? Whether you're
Right.
cis or trans, everyone
So social media has
dealing
such
with
a-
that
I've fallen
for
into
sure.
that
It has
looking
such
at,
a bad impact on
actors
mental
and stuff.
health.
I wanted to be that muscular dude, and I wanted to
100%.
do that. So
No,
yeah,
It is such a
does
bad,
exist.
like well-documented bad impact on people's like sense of self and mental health, and so.
But I also really quickly just want to say, like, I don't want people to think that, like, social media is turning people trans.
Yeah, we agree with that.
All right, can the
I don't want people to think that social media is turning people trans. Well, it's making people who don't have gender dysphoria have gender dysphoria. So does that make them trans? Maybe not. But it's certainly, just like they pointed out that Instagram can cause you to develop body dysmorphia, which I don't think anyone would dispute. You can develop gender dysphoria as well.
disagree a step forward?
I'm pretty sure TikTok can give you like tics, like Tourette's syndrome. So yeah, it can cause other forms of mental issues.
Yeah, okay, so my thoughts on social media and everyone suddenly looking or being trans. I think whoever is leaning towards that or looking towards being trans for answers was always someone that felt that way or felt some type of way about their gender or their identity or the way they present themselves. They're just gonna go that way. I know plenty of femme twinks who went the muscle queen pipeline. It's not a rare occurrence. And so just experience your life, have fun. Try not to take social media seriously because no one is advertising their failures. It's all fake.
Yeah, but I think it is also important to say that like social media is very, very effective. You know, I mean, I personally scroll on TikTok and I'm like, do I have OCD? Do I have autism? Like all these different things. And like it can suck you in. So it's important to be aware of those things.
I have a question for Samantha, since you have the largest platform here. Do you believe over the years you've inspired people to transition?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think that I've inspired people to believe that it's okay to be transgender, it's okay to express themselves, and that it's possible to live a happy and successful life.
How do you feel about the fact that some of them are going to regret the body modifications they got and going to have like...
I think that they should go to a doctor that is well-versed in gender care and have the appropriate psychoanalytic analysis done before.
This is a persona. This is a character. This is a YouTube persona, and that scares me. And I feel like this person has a vested financial, least of which, and credibility interest in denying the problems with transitioning minors.
Beforehand. That's not my
And
problem.
I feel like a lot of folks are going to social media looking for possibility models. They're looking to see if they're okay. I know for me, when I was very young, looking to see if there were other people like me, because for a long time I thought that I was
The only one.
exactly.
I thought I was the
right.
only one.
And so feeling like that, like suicide was a thing for me,
Me too.
right? And so when I did see a possibility, Mari, when I did see somebody that looked like me, that put me in a space where I was like, I'm okay.
Sigh of relief.
Right.
I will say there's also a difference from like showing people that you can have a positive life and then telling them what to do. So I think you on your channel are kind of like, hey, look what I was able to do and how this made me feel, versus like, you should do this because I did this.
Right.
So I
And I'm
think,
also, I try my best to be very upfront
right,
about the
because
issues
we
of
can't help if
transition.
someone's
Exactly.
going to change their mind on something. Like that's inevitable.
Yeah.
We're humans.
And I have to jump
Yeah.
on one more thing with that. Like, if I'm watching her channel and it inspires me to transition, I have been watching white straight men be president for years, and I've not wanted to be president once. So I don't identify with that. If we're going to talk about brainwashing, let's talk about where we see things every single day happening a certain way versus someone just living their life authentically.
People with gender dysphoria need therapy, not surgery.
They definitely need therapy, and adults should be able to get surgery. Children should not.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that one.
I don't.
I've been convinced.
We all agree.
I think
It's potentially both, though.
Yes.
I think everyone with gender dysphoria needs to go through a therapeutic process and mental health care before they make that choice for themselves.
Exactly.
I personally confused a lot of my gender dysphoria for body dysmorphia because no matter how much I feminize my body, till today I still don't feel comfortable in my own body. And now, like looking among like members of trans community, I see that people keep on getting more and more surgeries. The surgeries are no longer affirming. You can just tell that this person is like struggling with body images. I was able to get on estrogen pretty quickly when I was 22, and my mental health declined afterwards. And I attributed it to being still in the wrong body, needing more body modification. I ended up getting sex reassignment surgery. I do believe that transition was sold to me as a hardware fix for my mental issues that were not addressed. I still struggle with internalized homophobia that pushed me into transition in the first place. I struggle with borderline personality disorder, body dysmorphia. I'm on a spectrum, and I'm ADHD, and I have all those issues that were not helped, and I was still struggling with them after transition, and I still do. Overall, after a few years, I came to a conclusion that I was not in the wrong body, that I'm a gender non-conforming man, and I am a feminine man. That's what I am.
I don't know if you guys have heard, but I've had a lot of binary trans people say that it's not a mental health issue. Like, if you're trans, and I know I don't agree with that. Like, I think there's a disconnect between the mind and the body. I guess I'm asking that. Like, is like, do you think that it's a mental health disorder? And
I don't
needs to
think
have
being
therapy?
transgender is a mental health
Disorder,
disorder. I think, you know, gender incongruence is what they're referring to it as now. It's listed as a sexual health concern, but the gender dysphoria, which is the symptom that arises when you are transgender, is a mental health concern.
So maybe I'm thinking of like that.
Wait a minute. Trans-related and gender-diverse identities are not conditions of mental ill health. Then why should medical insurance companies pay for it if it has nothing to do? You know what? This is such bullshit. Classifying, they say it's not a condition of mental ill health, and classifying them as such can cause enormous stigma. Would you say that pointing out that someone has depression or anxiety, which is a mental ill health, which is a condition of mental ill health, that causes stigma, or acknowledging a mental illness for what it is and bringing it to light relieves stigma? It destigmatizes things to talk about depression. This is such a backwards view of mental health in general.
The symptom that arises when you are transgender is a mental health concern.
So maybe I'm thinking of like that's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say then in a sense.
And then
Yeah.
once you are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and I feel like this is kind of what the prompt is kind of hinting at, if you do have gender dysphoria, the only treatment for that is transition. Whether that be just a social transition, a medical transition, whatever transition fits you, that is the only way to heal your gender dysphoria. When I transitioned, the first thing my mom said to me was, "Can't you just be gay?" It hurt hearing that, but a big reason that she said that was she was afraid of what my dad would think. He's always been very, very conservative, very traditional, you could say. He would make comments about trans people, about gay people growing up, so I always knew that he wasn't necessarily accepting. So when it came down to me transitioning, I said to him, I'm going to do this. Either you're going to be the dad that accepts me and supports me through it, or like, goodbye. And he chose to support me, and we're closer than ever now.
And I think a lot of us go through medical transitions to easier go through social transition.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And so a lot of our folks that do transition and may detransition, both experiences are valid, but also understanding that we're not mentally ill because we're trans.
Yes.
Right. And I think that there should be a psychiatrist or someone within behavioral health to be able to say, okay, you're in the right frame of mind to make this decision. But I want to just make it very clear that trans people are not dealing with mental health because they're trans.
Absolutely.
I disagree. I feel like transgender is definitely, and elderly trans people afford for it to be classified as mental illness, so it's covered by insurance. Otherwise,
Right.
why are you getting the surgeries to?
Because
but
of
if it's not a
dysphoria.
medical condition,
The dysphoria is a medical condition.
it is, but it's in your head. I would say that you have some kind of mental disorder if you're
You're
trying
right.
to mimic a stereotype of opposite sex. to
Okay, but
pass
it's
in
not a
society.
mimic. It's
The treatment
it's
for this
aligning.
mental illness is to transition.
I have a question though,
Yeah.
because I have a gender dysphoria diagnosis. I always have. But I'm still where I am today.
Can I give you my honest opinion? I think that you were probably misdiagnosed.
I
and
don't
that-
think I was.
So you,
Do you
do
feel
have gender
dysphoria in your body?
I certainly do now.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Well, because of the
you
changes that you made.
want to talk about now, but at the time,
At the time, did
at
you?
the time, I genuinely believed I did. I thought it would save me. And then looking back, I realized that my dysphoria stemmed from some severe trauma that was not handled.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I think that mental health step is so important.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I've heard this from several other, mostly female detransitioners who we had some form of pretty bad trauma that spawned gender dysphoria symptoms.
Yeah.
And we can disagree about misdiagnosis or something later, but it felt real at the time for me.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it did. I didn't mean that.
And
in a,
no,
in a
I know,
malicious way.
I know. And it's one of those things where that's where the mental health treatment really needs to come in and get to the root of that issue, because oftentimes, specifically with the detransitioners I've talked to, that was ignored. I came out to my parents in a mental health facility after telling the therapist that I thought I was transgender. And she told me we had to tell your parents so that way you can get the help you need. It led to me seeing a gender therapist who, honestly, the issues I was facing were never addressed. To this day, no one ever addressed the fact that I had severe trauma and exploitation going on as a young teenager. Instead, I was kind of just affirmed in, you believe this, and instead of even just a little pushback, it led me to the point where the very first medical intervention I ever had was a double mastectomy at 16. A few months after that, I started testosterone because it was the next step of what I was supposed to do.
I don't know. This conversation is two things. There's a part of me that is really starting to think then it should just be completely banned for children, just outright, straight up, because that option is still available to you as an adult. The second is it also gets complex with gender dysphoria. Well, does a trans person have gender dysphoria or not? It's like that person had a gender dysphoria diagnosis and still does. So is that person trans? Is being trans a mental illness? Well, gender dysphoria is a mental illness, and do you have to have gender dysphoria to be trans? There's all these questions. It's a whole convoluted mess, and there are no good solutions other than recognizing that because it's so complicated, you have to approach it from as honest and truthful a perspective as you can. And the whole underlying belief that a male who transitions to female literally is female is wrong. And if that was not part of this whole discussion, I think things would be much, not completely, but much clearer for a lot of people than they are now. We are so in confusion with that philosophy, that mentality.
God intended for there to be only two genders.
This is just a religious question. I don't know why they would have this in there. It makes assumptions about what people believe or not. There's certainly only two sexes in nature, God or otherwise.
Okay, you go first.
Okay, so as a Christian, I truly believe that God created male and female, and He created that throughout life, throughout the nature, throughout the wildlife, throughout Earth itself. And then the arguments come up into the ocean sides of, well, there's these asexual creatures and stuff like that. Well, they were designed that way for a reason, and we humans were not designed to. We were designed to procreate and be able to bring life back to the earth, because we live and we die, we live and we die. It's a rotation of a process of life in itself, and it's its own journey. So I truly do believe that there is male and there is female, but I can respect people's choices. However, that's where I stand on it.
The LGBTQ plus community is not as accepting as they claim.
Yeah, everyone's on the same page.
Sorry, musical chairs.
Musical chairs?
Yeah. I'm embarrassed to agree. That is true information.
There's still so much transphobia
Oh, yeah.
within the LGBT
Yes, there
people in the
is.
LGBT community that hasn't been addressed yet.
Shoot, there's transphobia within trans people.
Absolutely.
When I was transitioning in high school, I searched for acceptance from the cis hetero world. And now I feel like I'm doing the opposite and searching for acceptance from my own community half the time. Like when I was in college, the queer community on my campus hated me because I did like heteronormative like guy stuff. I played lacrosse, I was in a frat, but like I wasn't that guy, I guess, that they had in their head. And every time I would go to the LGBT club meetings, I would get like they would stare into my soul like I was just this awful thing. And it's always just made me feel invisible and small in whatever space I'm in. And I find that just really disheartening.
Weird position to be in
Yeah.
because it's like one community, like I said, doesn't really want you, but you don't fit in. You can't really go all the way back, so you don't fit in with the rest of them.
We just shouldn't have to categorize.
Yeah.
Like, we shouldn't have to float around, wonder where we belong. Like,
Like,
it
we have
shouldn't-
like we
I don't
have the
understand
other
why it has to be that.
detransitioners,
Like,
but even then,
Enough
we're
with
all
the
still
labels.
vastly different individuals who have vastly different life experience, political views, religious beliefs.
Right.
You know,
You're not
experience
just
how
a
we
detransition.
yeah,
Right,
exactly.
That's so
Experience how
with
we
the trans
treat
community, right?
in some ways it's empowering because it feels like you're, even though all this happened, you're being seen as an individual for almost the first time after, you know, spending my high school years being lumped in by both the LGBT community and the rest of the people in a category. But it's also very isolating because you don't have really that community support that other places get.
I'm kind of shocked that Jubilee actually showcased D-trans people, but I'm glad they did. Amen. I wish more people understood that being against children undergoing permanent gender transition does not make you anti-trans. Like, nice one, Ellie. It was disgusting. They shut down Luca, the one with the long hair who detransitioned. Yeah, I'd love to see discussion between the psychologists. Yeah, that would be great. That would be phenomenal. For Samantha to say Luca was misdiagnosed when a medical professional and hardly knowing the circumstances was mind-blowing. These comments give me hope. This has got 200,000 views in 7 hours, so this is, you know, a video that a lot of people will see, and hopefully it shapes people's minds, and people who watch this video think about it differently, and then when they talk with their friends and family and coworkers, that they think differently, and things cascade. That's why this stuff is important. But otherwise, good luck and Godspeed.